One. One.
Hi, everybody. We're going to commence the keynote panel shortly. So please grab a seat. Get yourself settled in. Okay, please grab a seat. Nice to see everyone back in one place after this morning. So, welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed this morning's panel sessions. It's been a busy conference, so it looks great. And thanks for bearing with us on things like space and so on. But yeah, now we're going to have the first of our keynote panels over the conference. And this panel will be looking at the art and science of scale. And the panel will be chaired by the Honourable Dr. Andrew Leigh, the Assistant Minister for Productivity, Competition, Charities and Treasury from the Australian Government. We've also got some great experts who've come from various parts of the world and locally today. We've got Dr. Noam Angrist, the Academic Director of the What Works for Global Education Hub at the University of Oxford in the UK. We've got Filemon Javier, the Undersecretary, Legal and Legislative Affairs from the Department of Education from the Philippines. Welcome. Penny Morton, the former Minister Counsellor, Australian High Commission, Port Moresby, and Eleanor Williams, the Managing Director of the Australian Centre for Evaluation at the Australian Treasury. Please join me in welcoming our first keynote panel for the conference. Dr. Leigh.
Well, thanks very much, and welcome to all of you to what promises to be a fantastic discussion about one of the most important issues in development, how we work out what works. Can I acknowledge we're meeting today on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, Darranuna, Darranunawal, Yungu, Nalamanyan, Dunimanyan, Ngunnawalwadi, Dowdawadi, Dindi, Wangaralin, Jinyin. And I'd welcome all First Nations people present here today. I'd also like to do a special shout out for my former parliamentary colleague and now ANU Fellow at the Tax and Transfer Policy Institute, David Bradbury. David, wonderful to have your continued engagement on these important issues of policy. We know that rigorous evaluation can make a real difference. In the early 2000s, William Easterly wrote a book called The Elusive Quest for Growth, in which he argued that if you simply gave out insecticide-treated bed nets to prevent malaria, people wouldn't use them. Easterly argued that they might well be used as fishing nets or wedding veils, but he said unless you demanded a co-payment, you wouldn't get the malaria reducing benefits of bed nets. And that remained the view among many influential people in development economics for a number of years, until a team of economists conducted a series of randomised trials looking at the impact of co-payments versus free bed nets. When the results came back from a number of different countries, they were utterly conclusive. When you asked people to pay for a bed net, they were less likely to get one than if you offered it free. We know the power of free in all kinds of other contexts, and it works in bed nets too. And crucially, those who'd gotten a free bed net were equally likely to use it to protect themselves and their children. The randomised trials changed policy. Free bed nets were rolled out across Africa, and a high quality evaluation has had the effect of saving hundreds of thousands of children's lives through malaria. It's really important to bring that sense of modesty to trying to change the world. Not just assuming that we have all the answers and that theory alone can tell us something, but recognising that in a complicated world, we will often be surprised by the impact of our policies. And it's these issues that we're going to be delving into today with our terrific panel of experts lined up beforehand. You've had each of them introduced to you, so I won't repeat the introductions. Let me start off by throwing to Eleanor Williams, head of the Australian Centre for Evaluation, an important centre set up in the Australian Treasury. Eleanor, ACE was set up to put evidence at the centre of the policy-making process. Can you give us a good example as to how it's operating?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think building an evaluation culture is a pretty multi-pronged kind of activity. And we do it in multiple ways. So we do capability building, we do run training, we support people as they design and deliver their evaluations. But we also do some of the leadership and policy setting, sort of setting the parameters and expectations around evaluation. And we also do some delivery, which is aiming to demonstrate best practice. Because if you don't sort of show what leading practice looks like, I think it can be really challenging to understand what it looks like. So look, we haven't at this stage done a lot of work in the development space, but I'm really conscious that actually the development kind of context, particularly with the work of JPAL, has done a lot of the leading work in showing how evaluation can be used in a lot of different policy contexts, and we draw on a lot of their examples when we're making speeches and presentations to sort of show how this has been done internationally. But in our own context, we're working with the Departments of Health, Education, Social Services and Employment to really demonstrate, particularly where experimental and quasi-experimental evaluation can give you a really good sense of whether your investment's achieving the outcomes that are intended.
And you've got an evaluation profession which operates across the public service. Can you say a little bit about that model and how that's operating?
Yeah, so the Australian Public Sector Commission sort of designed this professions model, and the idea is because people who work in evaluation are sort of dotted through organisations and don't necessarily have a big network, it's trying to connect up and build that community of practice and really give this sense of professional identity. And I think we'd been running a community of practice in the Australian government for many years around evaluation and stayed around this kind of 800 people. But once we expanded out and put a bit more kind of grunt behind it, we're now over 4,500 members, which just shows the sort of scale and momentum and passion for evaluation across the Australian public sector. And that's across almost all of the sort of 200 APS agencies in Australia.
Lovely. Well, we'll come back to some of those issues around training and some of the institutional settings. Noam, you've worked on the question of what works in global education. What's the evidence suggest about higher or lower investments in education, and what is there institutionally that we ought to be thinking about in terms of embedding good evaluation?
So first I would say at the macro level there's clear evidence that education is a high return investment in general, but importantly, education when kids are actually learning. That maybe sounds funny to say explicitly, but in many systems education, kids are going to school but not necessarily learning. So there's new evidence and data showing that in a lot of low and middle income countries, 70% of children can't read, even many years into primary education. And so we did some research saying, well, what is the return to economic outcomes if you actually account for the learning, not just the schooling? And then it actually explains cross-country income growth up to 50%. So it's a huge engine of economic outcomes if you account for that learning. So then what improves the learning, that's been a big focus of some of the new research on this. And at first, actually, there's a bit of a sad story, which is a lot of the really popular interventions have not worked really well. So a lot of interest and hype around computers. I'm not sure if it's familiar, but the one laptop per child is sort of a famous example where everyone got a computer. People were really excited about it. It sounds really fancy. And then an impact evaluation showed it was not effective. So it's kind of one of the famous examples of where impact evaluation helped reveal what doesn't work, not only what does. And a lot of these input-focused interventions have not done well. So school grants, another very popular intervention in education, have also not done very well in the impact evaluation. So interestingly, there's actually some good news here for value for money, even though some of these results are disappointing, which it's actually the things where you're including more inputs and resources, that hasn't necessarily translated to good outcomes. In contrast, if you actually just focus on the pedagogy, so how often are you using diagnostic assessments in the classroom and kind of targeting the instruction to the kids' level, that works extremely well. That's had over a dozen randomized evaluations showing it works across countries, across contexts, providing a little bit more structure to how coaches support teachers, the kind of lesson plans teachers have. So actually very cheap things that don't require a lot of resource. Those things work really well. They improve learning quite a bit. And we were also involved, we set up a new structure called the Global Evidence Advisory Panel, which was an attempt to bring together academics, and it's co-chaired by Abhijit Banerjee, who's a Nobel Prize winner, as well as co-convened by some influential institutions like the World Bank and UNICEF, and forms recommendations, takes the evidence and says, okay, these things are, they call it good buys, and these things are bad buys. So these are sort of good investments, these are bad investments, and has some clear guidance on what works and doesn't work, and that's been really helpful for governments, for within institutions like the World Bank. Now, obviously, there's some nuance there, so maybe if it was a bad buy in one place, it could still be a good buy in another, so you need to have some contextualization, but on average, those lessons seem to be holding, and so actually just not just putting in more resource, but just more efficient investments on some of these approaches and some structured guidance is making a big difference.
So Noam, I remember when the US set up the What Works Clearinghouse, it kept on coming up with education evaluation after education evaluation that said that things were unsuccessful. And the critics began to call it the Nothing Works Clearinghouse. Presumably, then the incentive is strongly against having your program evaluated through a rigorous evaluation if you've seen a whole lot of other programs fall at the first hurdle. How do you change that and ensure that there is still an appetite for rigorous evaluation?
Yeah. Yes, we hope we don't become the What Nothing Works hub for global education. But no, it is important, and one thought on that, so one thing that I've gotten really excited about recently is A/B testing. I'll kind of come to this later, which is you can also benefit from the power of randomization, but comparing two versions of an intervention. So not always necessarily having a pure control group that gets nothing, but version A gets a little bit of this, version B gets a little bit of that, and that can still tell you something really important about what works best and what works most cheaply. And that is a little more comfortable for organizations because it doesn't feel so existential. It's not like you're not betting the whole farm on it. That said, we sometimes do need to know what really works and what doesn't work, very important. But A/B testing can help lower the stakes and still learn something really efficiently. So I think that's a tool that we could use more. And in addition, another thing that we've gotten really excited about is often when we're testing things, we're adding things and seeing if it works better. So kind of an effectiveness enhancing test. Something we've gotten really excited about recently is cost reducing tests. What happens if you've taken something away? You make it cheaper, you make it simpler. And there the question is, does it work just as well? Is it no worse? So actually there a zero is good. There a zero means you've still made it cheaper. And so that also makes people more comfortable with zeros, but still helps you improve efficiency. But yeah, sometimes we do need to know what doesn't work as well.
Yeah, so in the US, Arnold Ventures is the biggest private foundation that's doing randomised trials, and John Barron, one of the people who's running their evidence shop, has argued this is actually a real threat to those who want to do rigorous evaluation, that you need to be careful about the pipeline of evaluations you're putting up, because otherwise people will just shift away from rigorous evaluation to low quality evaluation because they know they'll get the tick. We then have Undersecretary Filemon Javier, Undersecretary of the Department of Education in the Philippines. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise. Phil Ray, the Philippines Department of Education has recently rolled out a new evidence-backed education reform, the Academic Recovery and Accessible Learning Reform. Can you tell us a little bit about that reform and particularly around how the government's designed it to give it the best chance of success?
Yeah, sure. So the Philippines is faced with a monumental and generational problem, particularly in academic performance and learning accessibility. International assessments suggest that many of our learners are behind in terms of academic performance, with 5 to 6 years behind. That's why the Philippines, the government, rightfully considered the academic recovery and accessibility to learning as an urgent requirement. So in October 2024, just last year, the Academic Recovery and Accessible Learning Act, or ARA law, has been signed by the President of the Philippines after it has been passed by the two chambers of the Congress. It's a law. It's not a mere department issuance. It's not a mere policy of the department secretary. It is a law, which means that it is permanent. It will be there regardless of the new administration. Even when there's a new department secretary, it will be there. There will be budget allocation because it's a law. In fact, in the pilot, we got from the government 1.8 billion to fund the project. It's about 30.5 million US dollars. Next year, we will be given 9 billion pesos to ramp up the ARA law. In US dollars, it's 150 million US dollars. Plus, in the law, it's specifically provided that the Congress has oversight over the implementation. Every 6 months after the end of the school year, we will go to Congress for a hearing and explain to Congress what happened. What are the results of the ARA law? So that's how serious the government is to solve this problem. So the aim of ARA law is to assist the learners, to put them at par in the grade level. Because as mentioned a while ago, they are currently behind. It's a national learning intervention program sponsored by the government for the benefit of the learners. You asked, Andrew, what are the items that we put in place in the hope that it will be successful. First, we did the pilot program. We did it in Region 9. It's a relatively small region in the Philippines for 52,000 learners. After 3 months of pilot, we already rolled out the program to 6.7 million learners. Hopefully, by the end of next year, we'll be able to scale it up to 14.7 million learners. We also do assessments to ensure that those learners who really need the program will receive the program. We are using the Comprehensive Rapid Literacy Assessment for grades 1 to 3 and the Philippine Informal Reading Inventory for grades 4 to 10. We also track the ability of the learners to learn using a system called Learners Progress Tracking. And we also track the ability of the tutors to train our learners. So we have requirements on professional background, on training and competency, and even in good moral character. In terms of delivery, because you probably know Philippines is susceptible to earthquakes, typhoons, volcanic eruptions. So what we did is that the delivery could be face-to-face, could be online, or could be blended. The law also require utilities, telecommunication companies to give free access to students on DepEd management learning systems. Also, we seek support from stakeholders, from different local government units and other government agencies so that the implementation of ARA law would not only be from the Department of Education, but for the entire country. It really takes a village to raise a child, especially in education. So those are the things, there are many things that we put in place in the hope that it will be successful, but those are some of the things that I can provide as an example.
Thanks, Phil. I could certainly resonate with your comments about extreme weather. Last time I was in Manila, the skies opened every day I was there, and the ability of local residents to navigate flooded waters was something to behold.
That's a new challenge, and in fact, before we don't have suspension of classes because it's heat, but now the heat index is higher, and therefore we've seen several situations wherein classes are suspended only because it's too hot for the children to stay in the classroom.
Can you tell me a little bit with ARAL what you learned from the initial pilot and how the program changed when it was rolled out fully?
Okay. So what we did is that we assessed the schools. We have more than 40,000 schools in the country. And what we did first is just check whether they are ready to roll out the program. 99% of those schools already come back to us and said, and gave responses. In terms of learners' readiness, meaning the learners are assessed, that we already know what kind of gap we should fill in, only about 52% of those schools are ready. For teacher or trainer's readiness, only about 32% are ready. In school environment, meaning there's a space where they can study, only about 29% are ready. Community engagement, only 32% and ready. And system support and governance, only 18% are ready. So we are assessing all of these things, Andrew, and it's the rollouts have been 3 months. We hope that the numbers will go up as the time comes by.
Thank you. Penny, you've just returned from Moresby, where you've been, with the Australian government has been supporting the Partnerships for Improving Education program. Can you tell us a little bit about that program, how Australia's supporting it, what's working, what's not?
Sure, thanks Minister, and it's wonderful to be part of the discussion today. And I'm very quickly going to say Apenu Norgeta to all of my Papua New Guinean colleagues in the audience today. It's wonderful to see you. So the evidence-based approach that we're applying under Partnerships for Education in Papua New Guinea is structured pedagogy, essentially, and Noam's already talked about the evidence behind that approach. I'm not an expert in structured pedagogy. I'm sure some of you know a lot more about it than me. But how we operated it in our partnership with the Papua New Guinean government, it's really about applying that one national curriculum through comprehensive teacher support, structured lesson plans, intensive teacher training. It's quite an intensive program. Where you're training all of the teachers, and then there's a lot of follow-up with the teachers to ensure that they're picking up the lessons and applying the curriculum, that one curriculum across the entire country. Now, it's supported by materials and textbooks, of course. Then there are, beyond the structured pedagogy approach, we also support some infrastructure for the schools to ensure that they're safe, to ensure that the students have wash facilities. And there is important system, at the national level, system-based work with the National Department of Education as well, which is complementing that structured pedagogy approach at the sub-national level. Look, Partnerships for Improving Education is a $75 million investment over up to 8 years. Importantly, it's a long-term investment, and that was a commitment that this government made under the International Development Policy. We partnered with the PNG government we created our development partnership plan, which makes a commitment to that long-term investments. Now we know from World Bank data, and which Australia funded in, I think it's 2023, around 75% of 10-year-olds in Papua New Guinea are not reading or comprehending age-appropriate texts. So it's the point around, it's not about bums on seats. I think there has actually been an uptick in bums on seats. There continues to be an issue for girls in particular about dropout rates, particularly as they move up in the grades, and children with disabilities in terms of participation. But predominantly the issue is about the teaching quality, and structured pedagogy globally tells us that that approach will improve learning outcomes over the long term. And there was a lot of evidence that we had, Minister, from previous bilateral investments and partnerships with the PNG government over a number of years, and of course the World Bank was previously in Papua New Guinea and now are coming back into the sector, and which is part of that scale up, which we might talk a little bit more about. And I just wanted to note a key part of our approach in Papua New Guinea. So the evidence, we're not changing structured pedagogy and how we engage in that approach, but it's how we implement it and how we work with the Papua New Guinean that government that has changed. It is based on a genuine partnership. We cannot, it's about training the Papua New Guinean teachers, it's about lifting the professional capability of the national government and the provincial governments to deliver this program and to deliver their national curriculum. We cannot, this needs to be delivered by the Papua New Guinean government, and it's their reforms that we are backing under the medium-term development plan and other educational long-term reforms. So it's the Australian government working in genuine partnership with the PNG government. I think I'll leave it for there for now, but just, I think the ultimate goal of structured pedagogy and of PI, Partnerships for Improving Education, is is to improve the education outcomes at the foundational level. That's hard work and requires long-term investments and patience. So it's foundational education.
No, thanks very much, Penny. I sort of feel as though I've got a slight window into the challenges you're facing. My uncle Keith Stebbins spent his career working on curriculum materials in Madang and Moresby, and somebody who's very, very much engaged on thinking about how you do that teaching. There is, though, probably some trade-off between whether you move to a more direct instruction style in which the teacher is following a tighter script, and whether you're focusing on trying to get the most talented people into the teaching profession. Did you think through much of that trade-off? Because one of the arguments that people make for direct instruction, people like Noel Pearson, for example, is that it allows a teacher to have confidence on day one without falling back on a reservoir of experience, comfort in standing up in front of a group and that kind of thing.
This is a very comprehensive program, and I should say that there are 21 provinces in Papua New Guinea and plus the autonomous region of Bougainville. And this is essentially a pilot, Partnerships for Improving Education. We initially started with 2 provinces and it was expanded to 4. So it's very comprehensive and hands-on teacher training. And I definitely there can be a trade-off there, but I think we're focusing on both aspects of that. We work with James Cook University to develop a new curriculum, and there's a focus on lifting teacher standards across the entire country, but then in the provinces that we're working in, there's a specific focus on assisting those teachers in the classroom. And I think if you're looking at a population of north of 10 million, the government released data that its population is 10.9, I think, this year, but say north of 10 million, you're looking at 90% of that population is rural and remote, and you're looking at a population of around 35% of that 10 million plus is school-aged children. So I think structured pedagogy in that context is probably going to have the biggest impact.
Thanks very much, Penny. Eleanor, you spoke before about some of the successes of Australia in terms of evaluation. Are there areas where you think we potentially haven't done so well, where there's kind of missed opportunities and where maybe institutionally Australia can step up the way in which we work in evaluation?
Yeah, look, absolutely. There's always room to move. So I think where we're at the moment is we've won a lot of hearts and minds. We're building a big army, and that's a really important starting point. But there is an interesting thing there just about the sort of journey you have to go on as an evaluation unit, as an individual evaluator, and understanding how to deliver context-appropriate evaluation. And there's probably a very good tie into this topic around scaling, is you really need that deft hand to understand how you want to design an evaluation for something that's a small pilot, where you're still learning and you're evolving and you're trying to understand how it's going to work in practice, to when you're starting to scale. So as you say, if you're moving from 2 sites to 4 sites, that's really a space where you want to start trying to understand, well, which parts of this intervention or program are fixed and which parts need to be adapted to context. And then when you're out to, from 4 sites to 1,000 sites, then you're really in a process where you think, okay, well, now that we know which bits are kind of fixed and which bits need local adaptation, you want to start evaluating in a different stage. You're hitting a different point of maturity. So I think there is a real sense. I guess the thing that we need to prove on is making sure that the evaluators in our army all have the tools to kind of spot what sort of evaluation is required. And we've spent a lot of time working on how do you spot those opportunities for randomisation. If you really want to understand how your program's leading to outcomes, how you might understand causality and how you can use your data to best effect to achieve that. And I guess the other point is we need evaluators to work alongside policy and implementation professionals. I think sometimes we treat scaling like it's a dark art, we've just got to kind of work it out from scratch, but there's actually a lot of literature out there and a lot of experience out in the world about how you do scaling well. And I guess then evaluation can work alongside to say, well, are we doing those things that we know lead to scaling success? And that we really need the evaluation community to get very mature to be able to really spot those opportunities there to say, okay, well, so, here's some of the features of good scaling that we could be monitoring and watching for.
So thank you for flagging the issue of scaling, which is one I want to circle back on in a moment. But do you also want to say a little bit about how microdata has changed in Australia over the last decade and what that means for the cost of evaluation? Because if we were having this conversation 25 years ago, then every evaluation would have to involve a survey. But that's no longer the case, right?
No, that's right. And even in the last 5 and 10 years, the quality of the data, and particularly the integrated data, has come such a long way. So there was a time where if you wanted to understand how prison leavers, whether they were turning up in emergency departments or whether they were in your unemployment queues, you just have to do all that work manually, where now that the linked data assets that we have, so we've got Apply to the person level integrated data asset, and Blade, which is the business level equivalent, they can give you a lot of insights into how a policy over here is impacting on outcomes across the board. And I'm conscious for a lot of different countries, they're looking to emulate that to some degree. But that data maturity journey is a big, hard challenge as well. And the more that your evaluators kind of understand the richness of the data and how it's connected and how it can be used, the more likely they won't have to do primary collection, which does really contribute to the expense of evaluation if you have to every time do a bespoke collection, as opposed to draw on your national education data.
And a shout out at this point to David Gruen, the man with 2 PhDs who heads the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Having David in that role has meant that not only have the data assets been expanded, but also David has been receptive to requests to match up randomised evaluations to individuals in a confidentialised way. I'm fairly confident that 3 out of 4 previous heads of the Australian Bureau of Statistics would have told researchers to get lost to that request. David understands the value of the data and the value of high quality evaluation. Noam, Eleanor very helpfully led us on to the question of scaling before. Through Global Partnership on Education, you're not just looking to figure out what works, but also to see it scaled up more dramatically. What are the ways in which you're engaging with the implementation science that Eleanor flagged before, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, so very much building and related. One of our aspirations is to start from the data that's there, and sometimes it's not, fully integrated and it's not kind of fully available, but we're still really interested in working with the data that's there because that doesn't have a marginal cost, and a lot can be derived from the data that's there. And often this does lead you to more of a quasi-experimental approach than an experimental approach. But those are really powerful and can be really cheap and actually help at scale, because often you have the data across the whole country or across multiple states or provinces. So as one example, we actually recently looked in India, in Uttar Pradesh, which has 200 million people, so massive scale. And some of the most famous evidence in education came from randomized trials that were with 10,000 people, which is still big studies. But then the scale-up had actually happened across the whole state. And so I think about 6 million children had received this effective intervention, but there hadn't been an evaluation of whether that had worked at scale. So we had evidence that the RCT and the pilot had worked. This was an approach that's getting a lot of attention, teaching at the right level, targeting instruction. Now it had scaled up, and we didn't know if it had worked when it had scaled, but that's what the government wanted to know. We invested in this. Did it work? So this happened, I think it was 2016, 2017. And so this year we looked back to see if there was administrative data that we could use that was collected that we could try to understand impact from. So we looked at the data, and you have pre-post. So you have baseline and end line. So what did the kids know at end line and baseline and end line, so you can see the gains. And then the question is, how does that compare to what they would have otherwise learned, right? Business as usual. We didn't have a peer control group, 1, because it was at scale, and 2, it already happened, so you couldn't introduce a new control group. But what we realized is if you look at the baseline across grades, let's say across grades 3 to 4, across grades 4 to 5, that's a proxy for what kids learn in a typical year of school. Not a perfect proxy, but it's a proxy, right? That's roughly what kids learn in a year of school. And so if you subtract what they got from baseline to end line from what they get between grade 3 to 4, you get a rough impact estimate. imperfect. You might not publish it in the top journal. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But really valuable as an impact estimate for the government. So we looked at that, and it was striking, very effective, and actually very consistent, almost identical estimate to the RCT, which doesn't always happen. So very robust to what the evaluations showed. So those kinds of approaches of looking at the data, seeing if you can apply one of these techniques with the best data available. I think that's one of the big advances towards understanding what works at scale. So that's around kind of these using the data that's there. Then the other approaches, which I think are really exciting, I touched on this a little bit before, are these techniques that aren't just about proving, but also about improving. So how do you actually keep iterating, keep optimizing, keep tweaking? And techniques like A/B testing, I think, are really interesting for this. And the technology sector is doing it all the time. Every time we Google, every time we're on Netflix, we're being experimented on, whether we like it or not. And people are figuring out what we're watching, why we're watching it. So what is different about that than the typical randomized evaluation? It's still randomizing. They're both randomized. But in the tech sector, it's often very rapid. They're using indicators that are a little bit cheaper and quicker and already in their M&E system. Did you watch it? Did you click it? And so something that we've been trying to see is, can you just apply that philosophy and that thinking for social programs? Are we comfortable using quicker indicators? Maybe we don't always look at graduation. We look at quick learning outcomes after 30 days, something like that, kind of these diagnostic assessments, and that tells us enough of what we need to know. And again, you have two versions of the program instead of a pure control. And so we've used 3 R's to describe A/B testing. So it's randomized, it's rigorous because it's randomized, it's rapid, and it's regular. It's something that's not a once-off. You're doing it again, you're doing it again, and each question leads to the next. And then that also helps you answer the first-order implementation questions. So for example, an A/B test we just ran in Namibia was around teacher coaching, which is often one of the most expensive things for effective education programs. And the question there was, often the coaching is in-person visits, which are really costly and really expensive. And so version A got 2 in-person visits over the term, and version B still had a visit, but only 1 in person, and then the follow-up was a phone call. So actually, speaking about the point I was mentioning before, this was a cost-reducing test, and we wanted to see if it was just as effective, but much cheaper. And it was just as effective, but about 40% cheaper. The government rolled it out. And so I think those kind of techniques that are rapid, that are embedded, that are iterative, they often end up answering the implementation scale questions a bit better.
Yeah, I really like that idea of learning from the way in which tech companies do their evaluations. A lot of the time we're making the medical analogy, and I think there's a lot to be learned from medicine, but that rapid response from tech companies, and also thinking about proxy variables. I remember my thesis advisor, the late Christopher Jenks, saying, well, the main reason that Perry Preschool and Abecedarian, the early training project, continued to get funded over 20, 30 years was that the early results were good. If the early results hadn't been good, these would not have been multi-generational studies. And so you're often looking at early potential indicators. Phil Ray, you talked before about ARAL and the successes that you've had. I'm curious if you'll reflect on some of the challenges that you're facing around evaluation or perhaps even around implementation, some of these issues.
Yes, we did. No, so the rollout is just 3-month-old, but we've seen some challenges. A national learning intervention program, you would realize, the inherent requirement of which is for us to be able to assess all of our students, all of our learners, and determine who among those learners are lagging behind. We have 40 million learners, and assessing them all by itself is a challenge. And then we realized programs like this, we can't just teach English, mathematics, reading, science. The approach must be holistic. Many of our learners are going to school hungry, and therefore they don't have the energy to study. Some of them don't go to school because they did not eat anything. So we realized, along with the intervention of learning, there must also be support in feeding. So we tapped our partners from the private sector and also local government units to roll out a feeding program so that the learners will be incentivized to go to school and attend the learning sessions. And then we also realized that if there will be coaching or learning and tutoring sessions, where will we conduct those? We have backlog in classrooms. We don't have a place where they can study. Many of our classrooms are already in 3 shifts. If we wait for the end of the 3 shifts, the student is already tired for that student, that learner, to have an extra hour of learning. So now we are thinking, where do we do it? So the current secretary is ramping up the classroom construction. The current backlog of the Philippines in classroom is 165,000 classrooms. The current secretary is hoping at the end of his term by 2028 there will be 100,000 classrooms more. Because we realize the space is needed for this intervention to be successful. Also, there will be, we experience delay of delivery of printed materials for the learners to study. We have 7,100 islands. And delivering the printed materials for them to study is such a monumental task. So number 1, we improve our logistics. And number 2, we are hoping to improve the online delivery of materials so that we don't need to bring the printed materials to the islands, to the last mile schools. And then we realize that not all within the country realize the urgency of students being at par at the grade level because it's really urgent. We have seen so many learners lagging behind. So what the Education Secretary did is to assign each and every EXICOM to a particular region to push for the implementation of the RR program. So you would see undersecretaries crossing the river, assistant secretaries trekking mountains to reach the school and push for the program. My schedule to cross the river would be next week when I get back to, to the Philippines. So
Wait. So you're scheduled to be going out to remote school yourself next week?
Oh, that is a requirement of if the secretary himself visit last mile schools to ensure that this program is implemented well. There are a number of rivers already he already crossed. We've seen pictures.
How long will it take you to get there?
3 days, 2 days trekking.
Wow.
My turn is up next week. But it shows that even the people in the government, in the central office, care about this program. And when the people in the field, the teacher, the tutor see that we go there to implement the project, to do catch-up, to do visitation, I think they are more inspired to push for the project, and hopefully will be able to improve the literacy of the Philippines in the near future. In fact, in the last 3 months, just in grade 1 alone, there's a 16% increase in the grade level. There's a 16% increase where learners are already at par with grade level, just for 3 months. So imagine what we can do in the next 3 years. So we are really hoping that by the push of the government, by the push of the community, we'll be able to make this happen.
So I know the World Bank has sort of gone forwards and backwards on this notion of how often people in head office should go out to developing countries. And one president will say we need to get them out a lot. The next president will say, well, all those airfares are incredibly expensive. And maybe they could deal with the public backlash by requiring a trekking component at the very end. So you can talk to them about that. Penny, I know PIE is now being co-invested in by the World Bank. Can you tell us a little bit about what that partnership means and what are the opportunities that arise, but also what are the complexities?
Thank you. So many of those challenges exist in PNG as well, and we're just talking about the World Bank. But I think just important to clarify initially that the new partnership that the Australian government has with the World Bank. It's really a partnership between the Papua New Guinean government and the World Bank. It's called Learning Enhancement and Access Project, or LEAP. The important contribution that DFAT and the Australian government has made is the commitment with the Papua New Guinean government to, under PIE, to the structured pedagogy approach. So the World Bank has agreed to mirror that approach and to expand it across a number of additional provinces, 8 provinces. That's one of the very unique aspects of the scale-up in terms of the education sector in Papua New Guinea. You've got a number of partners, not just the World Bank, but also UNICEF and other partners working in education. We've all agreed to follow that specific evidence-based approach, which is quite a different approach in the sense that often you get donors or partners carving up different parts of the education approach, but we've all agreed to deliver that one curriculum and a structured pedagogy approach. Yes, so just to note, so the World Bank coming in, it's actually an IDA loan. It's $100 million US, and it's a PNG government commitment So the Australian government provided a grant contribution to enable that loan to move ahead. We also brought in the World Bank because they were in PNG and we brought them back to consider PNG a few years ago from an analytical perspective. So we started to fund their engagement to undertake improvements in the national systems, for example, in public financial management in the National Department of Education, as well as monitoring and evaluation and data systems improvements and teacher certification and training. So we supported the World Bank to come back in a few years ago to create a pathway for the Papua New Guinean government to qualify for an IDA loan. So this has been actually quite a long-term process and a deliberate process between a number of partners to scale up, not just through DFAT and Australian government funding and of course the contribution of the PNG government, but other donors doing the same thing. There's a number of challenges with that approach, of course, which we may come to.
Great, thank you. We've now got two exciting opportunities coming up. The first of these is there's an opportunity for anyone in the room who would like to give a short speech about how you felt about the contributions today. That will be at 2:30, just outside here. And then separately from that, if anyone would like to ask a direct, focused question of one of the participants, we would be delighted. Those questions should be directed to one of the participants. So much as you might like to hear the views of all of the panellists, that would divide our number of questioners by 4. So each question needs to identify a panellist. So someone is roving with a microphone, or I'm happy to do it with mine. Please put up your hands if you'd like to ask a question. I'll leave it to, if you've got a microphone, please just take it to anyone with their hand up.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Stephanie Kimber from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. My question is for Noam, which is probably a bit greedy because we've had him in other forums, but what is the most exciting innovation or new thing that evaluations have taught you in education?
So just to check, what's a kind of new technique or...
Something that you've found through those, the rapid iterations or it could be low cost or cost saving, but what's the thing that you think is, that you always roll out at these conferences because it's so amazing and everyone should do it, especially in the Pacific?
Yeah. I would say... it's kind of a few points, but they lead into that. So one is, I think people often associate evaluation to be very expensive, right? But the randomization part is not expensive. You can flip a coin. It costs nothing to randomize, actually. So randomization is cheap. It's simple. It's the data collection that's really expensive. And then if you randomize the group that you now have to go collect data on, that's expensive, but it's the data collection. It's not the randomization. So one of the reasons I've gotten really excited about A/B testing is it's really cheap. It can be really cheap. It's using existing data, and the randomization part is cheap. And the returns are enormous. And actually once someone asked me, when do you stop learning? You've done these evaluations, you keep doing evaluations, when do you know enough? And I said, never. You never stop learning. It was kind of an unsatisfying answer because there's always more to learn, there's always more to improve. I think that's the mindset. It's a big mindset shift, actually, that it's not like a one and done, you do this thing, you move on. There's always a new challenge, there's always a new adaptation, there's always more to improve. So it's a mindset shift and a culture of learning. So A/B testing is one technique, but it's actually part of a package and a kind of culture and mindset shift that there's just always more improvement that can be done.
Great. Over here.
Thank you. Beth Webster from University of Melbourne. I've got a question for Eleanor. So Andrew mentioned that there's a tendency for people with their PEP program not to want to be evaluated or to bring in a soft evaluator to come in and say something very nice about the program. Now I'm thinking here the analogy with auditing, whereas often programs have to be audited, but they have to be audited by someone who's a certified auditor. Do you think there's a case for having evaluators being certified?
It's very timely. I'm actually leading a working group for the Australian Evaluation Society looking at professionalisation, particularly trying to understand whether there does need to be some credentialing. I'm not sure, because people come in from a lot of different disciplines and because different techniques are required for different circumstances. So you can potentially be an evaluator who just focuses on developmental approaches where you never know how to run a randomised trial, but you won't have the full suite of tools. I think there's probably an argument for something like badging, like you're certified to do this type of evaluation in this circumstance, because particularly if you do want to address causality, where you will need an experimental or quasi-experimental design for any certainty, then you do need to have the ability to do the analytical work that sits behind that. The one other thing I'd say, this is not to diss auditors, I don't know if there's any auditors in the room, but the one thing that's really hard out of auditing is, you know how people feel when they get audited. They feel very defensive and feel it's not the headspace that leads to continuous learning. And I think there is something about the evaluation space where we need to at least straddle. We need to be very transparent about what we've done and what our conclusions are and on what basis we make evaluative judgments. But there is something about the communication that needs to be done thoughtfully in order to allow people to stay in a learning mindset. So I often, with my team, where they'll say, well, this program fell down on A, B and C, I say, do you know how much easier it's going to be for people to respond to that if you say, we identified these things that are going well, and here's the 3 opportunities for improvement. Totally different way that you receive those findings and feel like you can act on them. Because with the former, you'll have a tendency to say, well, you didn't understand my program and you didn't look at the right things, and you'll get into combative mindset. So I do think there's something about evaluation, really thinking carefully about how to be transparent about what they've done, be clear and honest about the findings, but not frame them in such a way that it creates a defensive response.
Thank you. My question is to Filemon and Ray. My name's Jo Hutton from Oxfam. It's an incredible venture you've taken on, really. It's intimidating. And I'm just wondering, what have you set in place to measure how this is working? Obviously, we've talked about sort of existing data that could help, but then you've explained a number of factors that you've looked at that could improve educational attainment, food, access to children, materials, training, etc. So what have you got in place to look at this in the short term, but the long term? I'm fascinated to know.
Okay, we now do periodic, regular assessments among our learners. Before we don't, we just let them go to school, and the government appears not to be consistent in checking whether they learn or not. Now we do assessment at the beginning of the school year, in the middle of the school year, and at the end of the school year. And then we compare whether the program is successful. And then we ask if there will be learners who do not improve, we ask ourselves that question, what happened? And you will be surprised that sometimes it's not about mental ability or mental processes of the child. We soon realized that some of them would have issues in sight or in the ear. So we did vision and auditory check so that we can see whether they are not learning just because they cannot see or just because they cannot hear. And then when we weed those learners out, then we now focus to those students who have difficulty in learning, and that's what we assess at the beginning, in the middle, at the end of the school year.
Up the back, please.
Yeah, hi, this is Pallavi from Australian High Commission, New Delhi. My question is to Dr. Noam. You mentioned about Uttar Pradesh, and it was an interesting example. My question is that when we do scalability and define delivery and data systems, we do that keeping in mind the operational and financial requirements of the donor organization, whether it's Australia, UK, any other country working. But do we also keep in mind the flexibility that we should offer to the frontline workers who are actually implementing those programs, preparing them for any changing scenarios that they may have to encounter while they are implementing or scaling the program, especially in the context of India, where there is migration, disasters, other data-related issues that are there?
It's a great point. Thank you for the question. So Rukmini Banerjee, the CEO of Pratham, has this quote that I love that I'll requote and cite, which is, "Data often defies gravity. It flows up and it never comes back down." right? So often that does happen, right? People are submitting the data, but it's not serving the frontline workers, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest issues with data. And then you also don't know if to trust it, right? If it's just reporting, do we know if it's real? So I actually think one of the best ways to make data reliable and valuable is to make it useful for the frontline teachers. If it's useful for teachers, then they'll do it. If it makes their lives easier, more rewarding, more meaningful, then it will also be more accurate and also lead to good things in the classroom. So one example, we actually tried this in Botswana, and I think now actually Pratham's trying some version of this in India, where it's kind of a daily exit ticket. This is common in some education systems. So teacher asks the kids a question at the end of the day. Let's say the teacher was teaching addition. They'll have an addition question for all the kids. Then they'll record it on a simple piece of paper just to see did the kids get it right. And they'll have kind of a simple percentage. Okay, 70% got it right, so I should move on to something harder. If 20% got it right, then they might stay on that question. And this isn't data that gets submitted into a tablet. It's not data that gets submitted kind of for the higher ups. It's for the teacher to guide the teacher's instruction the next day. And teachers love it. They say it's one of the simple, best tools that they're given because it makes it easy to see who's progressing, helps them know what to teach the next day. And so actually when it's designed for the frontline teachers or implementers, it's often the best data. But sometimes that actually doesn't get fully digitized or collected. So there's a bit of a trade-off, but I think we need to do more of that.
Okay, so I'm going to use Chair's prerogative while we wait for the next question. Penny, there's a question I've really been wanting to ask you, which is about the way in which evaluation operates in a context in which our aid agency is part of our Department of Foreign Affairs. So some countries have a separate aid agency, and for them I think evaluation becomes a different thing because it's not being done by an agency which is also responsible for diplomacy in the world. You've been at the heart of that in a country where, quite unusually, the Australian High Commission is the most important set of foreign representatives. How do you find that conversation around evaluation goes, and what are some of the strengths and the challenges of that integrated model we bring to the world?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think that we're still on the journey in that regard. So under the international development policy that the government released in 2023, it was very clear that you should be using all tools of statecraft, including the development program, to achieve Australia's national interests, including particularly with a strong interest in the Pacific, Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific region. So the development program needs to, of course, demonstrate that it's delivering on national interests. I do want to, I think, challenge some of the ideas around soft evaluations and things. I just want to be very clear that the government under the development policy has actually raised the standards around evaluation of our development programs. It's connected to the national interests and geopolitics more broadly, but we are held to quite high standards in terms of measuring the efficiency, effectiveness, value for money and the outcomes of our programs, right? The DFATers, of which I see many in the room, are aware of this. We have, of course, the annual review cycle, but there are additional layers now that have been introduced, and there's a new development portal in which we have to actually report the scores that we receive under these processes, and there are new requirements around independent assessments. So just to put that out there in relation to the development program, the rigour has been increased over the last few years under the international development policy, and I only see it increasing. There is a tension, of course, in terms of delivering long-term development outcomes and ensuring that the development program is delivering on our broader national interests. I think that the development program aims to do that in a few ways. So, for example, locally led development is a key aspect of the development program, which intends to build the capability and the professionalism of our partner countries to ensure that they are making independent and autonomous decisions on a day-to-day basis. So that is a way in which we ensure the development program is supporting Australia's national interest, for example, in the Pacific region, where I most recently was working in Papua New Guinea, where you have countries that are not influenced and that can make decisions in their own right. I think that's probably one of the main ways. I mean, I just wanted to also mention briefly, if I can, because I don't think I'm going to get a question on this, but one of the key, we are talking to Noam and others in relation to the need to demonstrate real-time results. Of course, governments, both the Papua New Guinean government or whichever government we are working with, needs to demonstrate that its investments are delivering results. We, as a partner country, also need to be able to demonstrate to our domestic audience and to ensure that we have the support of the Australian public. We need to be able to demonstrate results, so we have that social licence as well. So this is why the government has committed to increasing the development program, the ODA under the development program. Transparency and accountability has to go hand in hand with that, so that there is that confidence in what we're doing. And it's not just about fraud and picking up fraud, it is genuinely about results. But we are fully cognizant that we need to have more real-time data and information to ensure that we're demonstrating the outcomes from our interventions. And as I said, we are talking to Noam. No announcements yet, and we're still having conversations, but we do recognise, and I think this is a great direction that the government's heading in. I really welcome this additional interest from organisations such as yours in the region, in our region.
I think that's a wonderful note to close. We have had a wide-ranging conversation going across methodologies, countries and systems from 4 terrific experts, from Penny, Phil Ray, Noam and Eleanor. I've learned an awful lot and enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for your terrific questions, all of them ending in a question mark. Please put your hands together and thank our panel.
Thanks also for the surprise questions. That makes it.
Yes, no, you guys are great.
Yes.